Well, good afternoon, everybody. Good to see you. I just got back from the feast last weekend. What a great time we had in Hawaii. The highlight had to be the fishing trip that Mr. Parman arranged. Went out for the afternoon and we caught some big fish. But it was only after we docked, went to Costco and threw big packs of fish one to another so we could tell the guests we were having that night that we caught big fish and had good dinner. Anyhow, it was fun, though. It was a great feast in Hawaii. My second time there, first time to the Big Island. And I'm sure you have lots of stories to tell as well. And it's really good to be back home, though. How many had a chance to read United President Victor Kubik's recent letter he sent out on the 3rd? Some of you have. Some of the comments there, I think, are well worth remembering. One is that we are commanded to be lights to the world. He quotes Matthew 5:14. God wants others to see the works of his Spirit living in us actively in a daily, realistic, down-to-earth life that we all share as human beings. Christ prayed not that we would come out of the world, but we come out of the evil of the world, and he sent us out into the world to be his representatives. When you think of the Bible and all the stories that are there, one of the best examples of how to be in the world without becoming part of the world, how to be in the world without being of the world, has to be young Daniel. Young Daniel. In the book of Daniel, we're going to go through just the first chapter, briefly summarize Daniel's beginning entrance into captivity in Babylon. This was like 2,600 years ago. Daniel would stay in Babylon for the full 70 years of the Judean captivity, and some Jews then would return home, and evidently Daniel stayed on in the empire. But you think of him at his young age, living through this ordeal. As the second slide shows, what would it have been like to be taken captive? Put yourself in Daniel's position. Think about yourself now. You're 15, 16, 17, or 20 years old. Pretty young age. You grew up in a royal family, evidently, well educated, had good training, good parents. The future was all his. And yet, God took him out of that comfortable position and forcibly moved him from his small town in Judea to a large cosmopolitan city, the capital of the world at that time, to Nebuchadnezzar's court. It must have been quite a transition. Babylon was called the Queen of Asia, and he was taken captive by force. Think about all the changes I had to go through. As we can see on the next slide. He was forced into a new civilization. He had to learn a new language. He was young and active enough. He had a good brain, partly why he was chosen for this 3-year advanced educational program by the king's men, because he was alert, he was active, he was already well educated. But he was forced to learn a new language, new ways of doing things. His religion, are you kidding me, was not acceptable. The way he practiced what he did, it was different. It was foreign to these pagans in this society that he now lived in. He was forced to adopt Babylonian customs. He was even given a new name, Belshazzar, his Babylonian name. Bel was the god of the Babylonians. So maybe, just a guess here, speculation, maybe some of his friends or enemies called him, oh, there comes Bel, the Bel worshiper. That had to be a slap in the face if that ever happened, which it probably didn't. But it would be a come down from this Judean prince who had it all, had the world before him, the world by the tail, and now he was pulled away into captivity in 605 BC. What was one big lesson, as the next slide talks about? What was one big lesson that Daniel's assimilation into this new culture that we can take home today? One simple lesson, a powerful lesson that we should be reminded of occasionally. Again, he was placed in the category of the young men to be educated. He was exposed to many new ideas, kind of strange ideas from his perspective, I'm sure. It was the center of the world. The worldviews from all over the empire came to the capital city of Babylon. So he had a flood of new information and new people and new things and new languages to learn. It had to be a little overwhelming at first. But he would go through this 3-year training program. Talk about advanced education. It was the best in the world at that time. It shows that you can go through higher education without compromising God's way. Daniel certainly did. He would assimilate. during that 3-year period, all mentioned there in Daniel 1 and a little bit of Daniel 2. His friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, went into captivity with him. And so did many other Jews. How would he survive? What is one big lesson of Daniel's assimilation we can bring home today? Nearly everything he knew as stability was gone, changed. It was over. He had a few friends, but he did have his belief, his faith in God, and that remained with him. Would he compromise, this young man, now thrown into the thrust of the belly of the beast, if you want to put it that way? How could he adapt and fit in without compromising God's way of life? That was a decision. As we see on the next slide, the decision about faith and purpose was right there, focused right before him. What would he do? How to be in the world but not part of it. Daniel struggled with that. You know, you and I struggle with that. As Victor Kubik said in his letter, we are in the world, but we got to be not of the world, but we are stuck. This is our job. That's where Christ sent us, into the world. But we can't be of the world. That was the key for Daniel. Daniel may have thought, well, where's God in this picture? I'm all alone now, just me and my 3 friends, and I've obeyed God. Why is he allowing this to happen? God's plan for him was beyond his understanding when he first arrived. He didn't know what was going on. So did he mope and feel sorry for himself, or did he apply himself? Well, he did the latter, very much so. He would see that even Nebuchadnezzar, the carnal king, would be used by God in a big way. Later in Daniel's writings, we see that. Would Daniel choose God's way? Let's go to Daniel 1, verse 5 and verse 8. On the next slide, Daniel 1, verse 5 and 8. And the king appointed for them a daily provision of the king's delicacies and of the wine which he drank. So here's the delicacies. The king say, okay, we got these smartest, the best, and the brightest young men all gathered together here. We're going to put them through 3 years of training. I'm going to make sure they have the right food. So he shares his delicacies. Sounds good. And the 3 years of training for them, so that they, at the end, they may have time that they might be able to serve before the king. And verse 8, but Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the portions of the king's delicacies, nor with the wine which he drank. Oh, what was wrong with those delicacies? Daniel knew, because of his Jewish training and upbringing, because he believed in God and trusted him, because he had the faith and the conviction that God's way was right, he knew that if he partook of those delicacies, he would be defiling himself. We don't know for sure what that was included in that. It doesn't say. But Daniel set his sail firmly in the right direction. You know, it's not the external winds of change, challenges, transformations that we see in life that really, conflicts that blow through life that make us successful or not. It's the set of our sail. That's the point. What is the set of our sail? Daniel's sail was set in a godly direction, and there was no way back. He wasn't going to stop his journey just because he was in a strange land with strange people and customs. One big lesson from Daniel's assimilation is right here on the next page. When conflict comes, Daniel chose God's way over the world. We can live in the world. We can adapt to the world. We need to do that. We don't want to be looked upon as those strange, weird people, although that's going to happen because of our religious beliefs to a point. We need to be looked upon as, wow, that person's got some character, some strength, and that's what happened with Daniel. The refusal of Daniel and his friends to disobey God in order to get ahead in the kingdom prepared them for their future greatness. It was just the beginning of God working with these young men. Powerful witness was there, and 4 young men in the kingdom in a powerful culture that was pagan. So Daniel chose God's way. We don't know why he chose not to eat. It could have been unclean meat in the food. It could have been wrong seasoning. It could have been blood left in it. It could have been the ritually sacrificed. We don't know for sure. But the next slide shows we need to choose God's way, and that's the point. That was Daniel's point. You read throughout the book of Daniel, you never see him once, not once, as recorded, compromise with God's way. Even when he was thrown into the den of lions for praying 3 times out the window to the east. He didn't give up. He didn't change his basic structure. Why should we be the same way? First of all, physical pursuits, getting ahead in this world will never bring spiritual satisfaction or satisfy spiritual hunger. Consistent values point us to true north. When we're focused and we have a strong sense of what is right and what is wrong, we're living by an overarching set of values that never change, we can always make course corrections. North Star is always right there. And we can pull our vehicle, our ship back on course when we get off. It keeps us focused on true north. We can see through, it sees us through the ups and downs, the tragedies and triumphs of life, and we focus on our actions. We're going in the right direction, even when there's a strong headwind, which there was for Daniel in this transformation in his time. We remain centered and directed. The ultimate purpose of where we're going, why we're going anywhere, remains the focus of everything we think and do if we're close to God. But when we begin to sacrifice fundamental principles for short-term gain, we short out spiritual success and short out our close relationship with God. It's not a good compromise. Again, it's never recorded Daniel did that. I'm sure he had human nature. I'm sure he thought about it once in a while when he was in trouble and traumas, but we have no record that he ever did. But Daniel did his part. Going on to the next chapter, Daniel 1, verses 8 through 9. Daniel did his part, and guess what? God did his. He expects us to do our part, to stand up for what's right, and then he'll back us up in it. Notice here in Daniel 1, verse 8 and 9. Therefore, he requested of the chief of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Now God had brought Daniel into favor. Oh, God brought Daniel into favor. Oh, he was diplomatic. He was smart. He was a good, well-educated. He could communicate extremely well. He could talk to people and persuade them. That's the next point down below. Daniel used his reasoning skills and his ability to communicate and persuade and get along with others, as we should. But God found him favor and goodwill of the chief of the eunuchs, his boss. How do you get along with your boss? Sometimes it's hard, I know. Been there, done that. But you know what? In this case, we don't read it here, but in verse 10 of chapter 1, the chief eunuch put his life on the line to be able to support Daniel's decision to not defile himself. Pretty close relationship, I'd say. But Daniel was firm and fair. In the process, Daniel was firm and fair. He didn't take no for an answer. He wasn't going to compromise. He provided a solution. He became the solution bearer, not the problem bearer. It was his problem, but he also came up with a solution. Notice verses 12 through 14. Verses 12 through 14. Please test your servants, Daniel told the chief of the eunuchs, for 10 days. Just give me 10 days and let them give me vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then let our appearance be examined before you and the appearance of the other young men who eat of the portions of the king's delicacies. Do a comparison. Do a scientific test here. And as you see fit, so deal with your servant. Daniel didn't say, I'm not going to do that. I'll never do that. And I'm going to be in your face and refuse and walk away. No, he reasoned with him. He gave him a choice. He was diplomatic. And he said, you know what? You're the boss. You do as you see fit. So deal with your servant. So he consented to them, and he gave them 10 days. So it was a test, a short time. But God backed him up again. And Daniel and his men, his friends, came out stronger and better than they were before after the 10-day test. So we can go on to the next slide where Daniel applied himself. God gave knowledge. God gave wisdom. God gave favor. And God gave understanding. What did Daniel give? Loyalty, a non-compromising spirit, a diplomatic approach to the people around him. He gave his all. He applied himself in education. He learned. It says here in verse 17, as for these 4 young men, God gave them knowledge and skill in all literature, all wisdom, Daniel, and had understanding in all visions and dreams. Daniel did his part. God did his. A simple combination that we should live by. Going on, God gave them favor tremendously. Okay, the 3 years now have passed. He's been in this higher educational thing. It's almost like your graduate program. For your program, you're getting your master's or your doctorate, and now he's finished. How do you think he came out? Verse 19 through 20. And among them all, none was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore, they served before the king. There was none like them. Not only that were the ones being educated, but in the entire realm. And in all matters of wisdom and understanding about which the king examined them, he compared and looked at each of these young men that were in training. The wisdom and understanding about which the king had examined them, he found them 10 times better than them all who were in all the realm. Daniel applied himself. Daniel worked hard. Daniel lived in the world, but Daniel didn't compromise to become of the world, as we should never do. So remember this big principle. When you're in conflict in this world we live in, choose God's way, not the world's.